The night it finally ended. Began. As most endings do. Not with a roar. But with a sound far worse. Laughter. Not the warm, open-throated kind that fills a room and makes strangers feel like old friends. Not the nervous, apologetic laughter that people use when they don't know what else to do with the silence between them. This was something sharper. Something with teeth. The kind of laughter that doesn't just wound. It leaves a mark you'll carry long after the wound heals over. His name was Daniel Whitmore. He was 37 years old on the night he said the last thing he would ever say to his wife at that bonfire on the coast of North Carolina. He had brown hair that had started going silver at the temples. The kind of hands that could fix things, build things. The kind of hands that had once held hers across a table at a candlelit restaurant in Charleston on their third date. He was a quiet man. Not broken quiet. Not damaged quiet. Just the kind of quiet that you earn after years of learning that most words aren't worth the breath it takes to say them. He stood at the edge of a bonfire party that was not his party. With people he didn't entirely know. On a stretch of coastline that smelled like wood smoke and low tide. Tiki torches lined the shore. A Bluetooth speaker somewhere was trying too hard with something that sounded like commercial reggae. The kind of music that exists only to give people an excuse to move their bodies in ways they'll have to justify to themselves in the morning. His wife was named Celeste. Celeste Whitmore had been his wife for 6 years. In the beginning, she was electric. That was the word he always used when he tried to explain her to people who hadn't met her. Electric. She walked into rooms and something changed in the air. She laughed loudly and unapologetically. She had opinions about everything, from policy to the best route through Midtown Atlanta. She was the person who remembered the name of your cousin's dog and sent you articles at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She was, in the beginning, the kind of woman who made you feel like being chosen by her meant you were worth something. The beginning, of course, was a long time ago. By the night of the bonfire, 6 years had done what 6 years do to the things you don't tend carefully enough. The electric charge had become something else. A low, persistent hum of tension. Of criticism. Of small humiliations that arrived so regularly Daniel had almost stopped noticing them. Almost. The almost was doing a lot of work in his life by then. He had been watching her for 45 minutes before he walked over. 45 minutes of standing near the edge of the firelight with a warm beer he wasn't drinking. Watching his wife laugh at another man's jokes. The man's name was Marcus Hale. He was a colleague of Celeste's from the marketing firm where she'd been promoted twice in 3 years. Tall. Easy smile. The kind of man who wore linen shirts to beach parties with a confidence that suggested he'd been wearing linen shirts his whole life without apology. Daniel watched Marcus lean close to Celeste's ear to say something over the music. Watched her throw her head back and laugh. Watched her reach out and touch his arm. Fingers lingering 2, 3, 4 seconds. Past the boundary of anything you could still call casual. He watched because he'd been watching for months. Cataloging moments like evidence in a case he didn't want to bring to trial. He set down his beer in the sand. He walked over slowly, with the unhurried steadiness of a man who has already made a decision he can't unmake. He waited for a natural pause in the conversation. Then he looked at Celeste. And he said it. Quietly. Without drama. Without theater. The words were 6 syllables total, and he placed them between them like a stone placed on a grave. You won't find me here when you come back. She blinked. Tilted her head the way she did when she was deciding whether something deserved her full attention or just part of it. And then she laughed. Not nervously. Not sweetly. She laughed with the absolute confidence of a woman who had never once taken seriously the possibility that the consequences of her behavior might actually arrive. She laughed like he had said something slightly ridiculous. The way you laugh at a child who tells you they're going to run away from home. Fondly dismissive. Thoroughly unimpressed. Then she turned back to Marcus and said something Daniel couldn't hear. And he watched her go back to dancing. Her body tilting into the firelight. Like she'd already forgotten the conversation ever happened. Daniel Whitmore stood in the sand for several minutes. Completely still. Listening to the blood move through his ears. He was not angry. Or rather, he was, but anger was too small a word for what was happening inside him. It was more like something enormous and tectonic was shifting in a place so deep inside him that the surface. His face, his posture, his quiet hands. Showed nothing at all. He was becoming a different man in real time. Standing beside a bonfire on a North Carolina beach. And nobody noticed. Not a single person. He turned and walked through the low scrub pines that ran behind the beach. He walked slowly. He did not say goodbye to anyone. He did not look back. The sand was cold under his shoes. The kind of cold that comes in from the water at night when the day's warmth has lifted completely. He walked through the trees and reached the coastal highway on the other side. And he stood on the shoulder of the road. And he looked down at his button-down shirt. The blue chambray one that Celeste had said, between sips of her second gin and tonic earlier that evening, actually looked decent for once. And he took one slow breath. He took out his phone. 11% battery. He opened a rideshare app. He booked a car. And when the headlights appeared around the bend, coming to collect him, Daniel Whitmore understood with perfect clarity. That something had ended. And something else, though he had no name for it yet, was just beginning. The driver never introduced himself. He smelled like fast food and air freshener and drove with both hands on the wheel in the stiff, careful way of someone who knows they're being raided. Daniel sat in the back seat and watched the ocean lights disappear in the rear window. He said nothing. The driver said nothing. It was the most comfortable conversation Daniel had had in months. He didn't book a hotel online. Too easy to trace. He had the driver drop him at the edge of downtown Beaufort. And walked 3 blocks until he found a motel called the Pelican's Rest. Wedged between a seafood shack and an empty lot. Where grass had come up through the concrete in long, defiant stalks. The kind of place that took cash without commentary. He paid for 2 nights, got a key attached to an orange plastic fob the size of a matchbook. And found room 11 at the end of a covered walkway. That smelled faintly of mildew and the particular sadness of transient places. The room was small. A double bed with a rust-colored duvet. A television bolted to the wall above the dresser, facing the bed like an accusation. A window with curtains the color of old mustard that didn't quite meet in the middle. He sat on the edge of the bed and didn't turn the TV on. He didn't look at his phone. He just sat. The silence in that room was a different kind of silence than the silence he'd grown used to at home. At home the silence was never empty. It was always full of things unsaid. Always vibrating with the unspoken weight of Celeste's moods. Her complaints, her 1,000 casual dismissals. But this silence. In room 11 at the Pelican's Rest. Was clean. It was his. And it had no edge to it, no waiting sting. Just the low hum of the ice machine at the end of the hall. And the distant sound of a freight truck moving down the coastal road. He sat in it for almost an hour. The first text arrived at 11:47 at night. Daniel. Where are you? Not a question. A command. The absence of a question mark was entirely typical of Celeste. Who had a way of inflecting even her requests. As though they were obligations she was graciously allowing you to fulfill. Then, you being dramatic. Then, at 12:08. Seriously, you need to stop sulking and come back. It's just a party. Then. This is embarrassing. People are asking where you went. He read each one and put the phone face down on the duvet. He took off his shoes. He lay back on the bed and stared at the popcorn ceiling. And thought, without quite intending to, about the first morning he'd ever made Celeste breakfast in bed. It had been maybe 4 months into dating. She'd stayed over and he'd gotten up early. And made French toast with bread that was starting to go stale. And strong coffee. And sliced an orange the way he'd seen his mother do it. Peel intact, shaped into a fan. When he brought it in on a cutting board because he didn't own a tray. She'd looked at him from the pillows with her hair all sideways. And said, "Who taught you how to do this?" And he'd said, "Nobody. I just wanted you to have something nice." She'd smiled in a way that had nothing complicated in it. He hadn't seen that smile in years. He turned his phone back over. She had called 4 times. He didn't answer. By 1 in the morning she had left 3 voicemails. He listened to the first one. Brisk, irritated, with the sound of music still playing in the background. He listened to the second, which had the slightly slurred quality of someone who'd had another drink. And decided that a softer approach might work better. A performative pout voice. "Daniel, come back, Hack. Stop being weird." He deleted it before it finished. The third voicemail he almost didn't play. But he did. And he stood in the middle of that small room, with the phone pressed to his ear, and listened to his wife's voice. Lower now. Sharp-edged with contempt. Behind her he could hear the ocean and the dying end of the party music. And she said words that he did not forget. Words that landed not in his chest where emotion lives, but somewhere deeper, somewhere more structural. Like a load-bearing wall. If you think walking away made you look strong, you're wrong. You're just a coward. This is why people say what they say about you, Daniel. You don't do anything. You just sit there and feel sorry for yourself. He played it twice. Then he set the phone on the dresser and stood over it for a moment. Then he picked it up and began, methodically and without ceremony, to delete everything. The shared photo albums. The joint playlist they had named Road Trip Always in Better Days. The shared grocery app. The shared note called Vacation Ideas with 47 suggestions, most of them his. Gone. 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 He didn't cry. He didn't feel the hot volcanic surge of rage he might have expected. He felt something colder and cleaner. A kind of focused quiet. The same feeling he imagined surgeons must develop. That necessary distance from the human cost of what they're doing, so that the work can be done precisely and well. She had laughed when he drew the line. She had assumed he was performing. She had called him a coward in a voicemail left on a public beach, after dancing with another man at a work party, while wearing the bracelet he'd given her on their 4th anniversary. He lay back down on the rust-colored duvet in room 11 and closed his eyes. He didn't sleep for a long time. But when he finally did, it was the deepest sleep he'd had in 2 years. In the morning he bought coffee from a gas station next door, and drank it in a plastic chair outside the motel room door, watching a pelican stand absolutely motionless on a wooden piling at the edge of the marsh. He respected the pelican enormously. He envied it. By 8 o'clock, messages had arrived from Celeste's younger sister, Brienne, whose tone suggested she had been given a curated version of events. He did not respond. By noon, Celeste had called his office line. His assistant texted to ask if everything was all right. He texted back, "Yes. Tell anyone who calls that I'm traveling. Don't worry." He could almost feel his assistant deciding to mind his own business. Which was exactly the right instinct. He spent the afternoon sitting on the bed in room 11. Not sleeping. Not watching television. Thinking. Pulling up memories the way you pull up old receipts from the bottom of a drawer. Things you kept without really knowing why. Things that are suddenly, in a new context, evidence of something you weren't ready to name before. The dinner she cancelled 3 times in the same month. Each cancellation arriving as a text, never a call. The weekend she came home from what she said was a work conference. And smelled different. Not like perfume exactly. Just like a different atmosphere, a different set of rooms. The night he waited up until 2 in the morning. And when she finally came home, she was annoyed by his being awake. As though concern were an imposition. The 100 small moments he had explained away. Reframed. Given the benefit of the doubt. That he now understood he had been extending. Not as generosity. But as self-protection. It was later that night. That he logged into the shared cloud account. They had set it up in the first year of marriage. One of those practical decisions that feel romantic in the moment. Shared calendars, shared storage, a digital life built for 2. He hadn't accessed it in months. He opened it without a plan. Just drifting. The way you drift through a house in the dark when you can't sleep. The folder was labeled backup events. He almost passed it. He clicked without really deciding to. The first few photos were innocuous. Holiday party photos from her office. Pictures from a yoga weekend upstate. Then the album titled Workshop, Asheville. He remembered that trip precisely. 9 months ago. She had presented it as a week-long professional development intensive. Marketing strategy, leadership sessions, guest speakers. No spouses, she'd said, almost apologetically. All networking and breakout sessions. You'd be miserable. He had accepted this. He had picked her up from the train station when she returned. Tired and distant in the way that seemed like travel fatigue. He had brought cinnamon rolls from the bakery near their apartment because she loved them. She had kissed his cheek. The way you kiss a wall. He opened the album. The first photo was what she'd promised. Conference room, name tag on a lanyard, coffee in a paper cup. Normal. Unremarkable. But then the album kept going. And the conference room didn't. Third photo. A mirror selfie from a hotel bathroom. Hair down. Fresh lipstick. A silk robe he had never seen before. The kind that didn't come from any shared shopping cart or holiday wish list. He kept scrolling. Her across hotel bed linens, laughing at something off camera. Her holding 2 champagne flutes at what appeared to be a rooftop bar. City lights behind her, eyes bright. Brighter than they'd been in anything he'd photographed of her in 2 years. Her with one leg draped across someone's lap. A man's hand visible at the bottom of the frame. Resting low on the outside of her thigh. With the unguarded ease of something practiced and familiar. And then, toward the end of the album. A photo that left no room for interpretation. Or mercy. Celeste and Marcus Hale, faces turned toward each other on a rooftop. Her hand under the table. His head angled close to hers. The whole image carrying the unmistakable signature. Of 2 people. Who have stopped. Pretending. To each other. Daniel sat completely still for a very long time. He didn't feel what he expected. He didn't feel the hot eruption of rage. Didn't feel the chest-collapsing devastation of romantic betrayal. What he felt was something colder and more geometric. Like a vast mathematical proof he had been slowly, unconsciously working toward for months. Had finally resolved into its final, irrefutable answer. He felt, in that horrible quiet, the sensation of being confirmed. He went to the bathroom and was sick. Stood over the sink afterward with water running cold over his wrists. And looked at himself in the clouded mirror. He looked like a man who had just come out of a building that had collapsed around him. Pale, damp. Shocked not by the fall itself, but by the sudden, clarifying reality of having survived it. He went back to the phone. Kept scrolling. Not because he wanted more evidence, but because the full shape of the thing needed to be understood. The timestamps mattered. The Asheville workshop had been 9 months ago. But the photos didn't stop there. There was a set from a regional marketing symposium, 7 months ago. A set from what appeared to be a private dinner, 4 months ago. And then, 3 weeks before the beach party. A photo he almost couldn't look at directly. Celeste with her face turned into Marcus's neck. Her eyes closed. One of his hands in her hair. The whole image radiating the specific intimacy of people who have been doing this long enough to stop being careful. This was not an incident. This was a life running parallel to his own. He sat very still for a very long time. Then he put the phone face down on the bed. Face down as though he could make it stop. As though gravity might delete what he'd seen. Then he stood up, walked to the window. And pulled back the mustard curtain. To look out at the parking lot and the highway beyond it. Cars passed in both directions. With complete indifference to whatever was happening in room 11. The world was doing exactly what it always does. Which is nothing at all. He let the curtain fall. He booked a rental car for 8 o'clock the next morning. He found a furnished one-bedroom sublet in a small city 4 hours west. Available immediately, cash preferred. He messaged the owner, a man named Vernon, who responded in 3 words. Fine. Come Thursday. He started moving money. Not all of it, just his portion. Which had always technically been separate. Directed into accounts she didn't know existed. He realized, packing his few things into a grocery bag he found under the motel bathroom sink, that she hadn't asked much about him at all. In a very long time. He left the Pelican's Rest at dawn. He left no note. He gave Celeste exactly what she had given him. For the last 2 years of their marriage. Which was nothing. Offered completely. Without explanation. Vernon's property was a 1-bedroom apartment. Above a closed thrift shop. On a street so quiet you could hear individual cars from 2 blocks away. The floors creaked in a pattern that Daniel had memorized within the first 12 hours. The shower made a sound like a small earthquake when the water temperature changed. None of this bothered him. He put his grocery bag down on the kitchen counter. And sat in the one chair the apartment contained. A ladderback wooden chair near the window. And breathed in the particular silence of a place where no one knew where he was. He bought a prepaid phone at a gas station that afternoon. Cash. He put his real phone in the kitchen drawer under a takeout menu. And forgot about it for 2 days. On the 3rd morning he took it out and turned it on. The notifications arrived in a wave that might have been designed to induce vertigo. 47 missed calls. 19 voicemails. 83 text messages from 9 different contacts. Celeste. Her sister Brienne. 2 of Celeste's friends from work. A co-worker who had been enlisted as a neutral party. And Celeste's mother, Patricia. Whose message was the one that told him the most. Daniel, I don't know what's happening but please call. Celeste is very upset. Patricia had never once, in 6 years, called him first about anything. He read the arc of Celeste's messages the way you read a weather map. As information about what was coming, not what was felt. The first dozen were irritated, clipped. Still carrying the faint assumption that he was sulking nearby. And would eventually tire of his own gesture. By the middle of the next day's messages, the tone had shifted into something more urgent and less performative. By the third day there was something else there. The early stage tremor. Of someone who is beginning to understand that the rules of a game they thought they controlled have changed. He opened one voicemail. Her voice was different. Lower. Slower. The confidence that had colored everything she said to him for so long was gone. And in its place was something almost unrecognizable. She sounded young. She sounded frightened. She said, "I don't know what you think you saw. I'm asking you, please come home. We can talk about it. I'll explain everything. I'll explain everything." He held the phone and let the voice message run out. And sat with those 3 words for a while. She would explain everything. As though the photographs were a misunderstanding. As though the timestamp spanning 9 months were a clerical error. As though Marcus Hale's hand on her thigh were somehow a story she could narrate her way out of. If only Daniel would sit still long enough to listen to her tell it. He deleted the voicemail without saving it. That evening a message arrived from an unknown number. Just one line. "She's looking for you. Telling people you had some kind of breakdown. Says you need help and she's worried." He typed back. "Who is this?" No response ever came. He sat with the information. She was building something. A story. A context. The unstable husband narrative. She was painting him into a corner. So that when the truth about Asheville came out, it would arrive already discredited. Already framed as the delusion of a man in psychological crisis. She was good at this. He had always admired, before he had reason to fear, the precision of her mind. But she didn't know everything he had. She didn't know about the backed-up files. She didn't know about the voice recordings. Candid conversations he'd saved over months. Initially with no specific purpose. Out of some instinct he hadn't been able to name until now. She didn't know about the screenshots. Or the conversations routed through a fitness app they'd both used. A back channel he'd stumbled onto 2 months ago and said nothing about. She didn't know. Because she had never once considered that the quiet, spineless man she lived with might have been paying attention. All along. 1 week after leaving the beach party, Daniel sat in a coffee shop 4 miles from the sublet, connected to their public Wi-Fi, and created an anonymous account on a popular online forum. He was not impulsive about it. He sat for an hour with a coffee he didn't drink, turning the decision over, examining it from every angle available to him. He was not trying to destroy her. He was not operating from rage. He was operating from something more fundamental than rage. The simple, exhausted need to have the truth exist somewhere outside of his own head. He wrote carefully. He did not use real names. He changed the city, changed the industry, changed the peripheral details. He described a marriage of nearly 7 years. A wife and a co-worker. A company retreat. A shared cloud account stumbled upon. A voicemail in which a wife calls her husband a coward and mocks his emotional sensitivity to the sound of the ocean and dying party music. He described the photographs. Not graphically, but with the compressed neutrality of someone who knows the facts are enough. Then he attached the screenshots. And he posted it. Then he closed the browser. Drove back to the sublet. Sat in the ladderback chair. and watched the parking structure across the alley until it was dark. He didn't check the post for 6 hours. When he finally did, the number of responses required him to scroll for several minutes before he reached the end. Thousands of comments. The post had moved through multiple forums. People were not just reading it. They were analyzing it with the kind of methodical, communal forensics that the internet brings to these things when it decides something matters. They named what they saw. The gaslighting. The contempt. The casual ongoing cruelty of being mocked by someone who knew you would stay anyway. Many people wrote about recognizing it from their own lives. The particular paralysis of being loved badly by someone who had learned that your love was unconditional enough to survive their worst behavior. And then, buried in the comments, a message from a user with a throwaway account. I think I know who the coworker is. Can you message me? He hesitated. Then wrote back. Her name was Meredith. She was engaged to Marcus Hale. They had been engaged for 8 months. They were supposed to get married in 9 weeks. In a ceremony that had cost her parents $44,000. And taken 14 months to plan. She had found the post through a friend who forwarded it without knowing the connection. She had read every word. She said she hadn't been able to stop shaking for 4 hours. I'm so sorry, she wrote. He wrote back. I'm sorry too. She asked if he had more. The specific kind of more that a woman needs when the floor has fallen out. And she needs to understand the full architecture of what she's been standing on. He sent her everything. Not out of spite. Out of mercy. No one deserved to walk into a marriage wearing a blindfold someone else had tied for them. 4 days later, Marcus Hale was terminated from the company where he and Celeste had worked. Meredith, it turned out, worked in corporate human resources. Within the week, the professional walls began closing around Celeste as well. Colleagues who had known, or suspected, and said nothing, began to quietly distance themselves. The small social architecture of her professional life. The lunch invitations, the group messages, the casual after-work drinks. Contracted without announcement. The way ice recedes in warming weather. Gradually. And then, all at once, she posted something on her private social account. A tearful, carefully lit video. Describing a malicious campaign directed at her by someone she had trusted. She positioned herself as the victim of a man's wounded ego. His inability to process the complexities of a marriage that had simply grown complicated. The comments were not what she anticipated. People are perceptive in ways that liars underestimate. The video had the quality of performance. Slightly too composed, slightly too calibrated in its softness. And the people watching it could feel the calculation underneath. One person replied to her video with a single question. Did he post it, or did you just give him the material? She took the video down 6 hours later. Daniel did not watch any of this with satisfaction. He was sitting in a ladder-back chair 4 hours away. Eating takeout noodles from a container. Listening to the parking structure across the alley settle in the evening cold. He was tired. The particular, marrow-deep exhaustion of someone who has been fighting a battle for longer than they realized. And is only now, in the aftermath, discovering the true extent of the effort it took. He called his mother. He told her everything. There was a long silence on the line. The specific silence of a mother who is deciding whether to offer comfort or truth. She offered both. In the careful measure only mothers know how to calibrate. You should have told me sooner. I know. Are you safe? Yes. Are you eating? He looked at the takeout container. Technically. She exhaled in a way that meant she loved him and was angry at him simultaneously. Okay. Come home when you're ready. Not before. 2 days after that conversation, someone tried to break into the sublet. The front door lock was damaged in a way that read, to the locksmith. Daniel called the next morning. As deliberate. Whoever had tried hadn't gotten in. But they had tried carefully. With the kind of patience that suggested planning rather than impulse. He moved his backup drive into the car. He changed the locks. And he understood. Sitting on the edge of the bed. In the creaky apartment above the closed thrift shop. That this was no longer just a marriage ending. This was a woman trying to control the story of its ending. And the story she needed to tell required Daniel to be unreliable, erratic, unstable. She needed him to be the ghost. He had decided to be something else entirely. He heard the doorbell at 10:43 on a Tuesday morning. He looked through the peephole. With the wariness of a man who has recently had his lock tampered with. On the other side of the door stood a man he had never seen before. Mid-50s. Gray at the temples. A jacket that cost money in the way that well-made things cost money. Quietly and without display. A leather briefcase held with the practiced ease of someone who has carried one every working day for 25 years. Behind him, parked at an angle in front of the building. A dark green sedan with government-adjacent license plates. Daniel cracked the window above and called down. "Can I help you?" The man looked up. "You're Daniel Whitmore." Not a question. "I'm not." It was a reflex. Pointless. "I watched you look through the peephole for 30 seconds. Let's not waste your time." Daniel opened the door. The man introduced himself as a representative of a private law firm retained by Celeste's family. Celeste, he explained, was preparing civil claims. Digital defamation. Invasion of privacy. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. She had a documented history of prior anxiety. Corroborated by medical records and therapist notes. She had a theory of her husband's behavior. Controlling, obsessive, increasingly erratic. That she had been carefully establishing with the people around her for some time. The man reached into his briefcase. And produced a manila envelope. Which he extended through the gap in the doorway. With the neutral courtesy of someone handing over a document at a county clerk's office. "Read it carefully." He turned to go. Then paused. "Without turning back," he said. "In my line of work, I see a lot of these. Couples dismantling what they built. Usually one of them knows, somewhere, that they've done wrong. The other one finds out eventually. Which one you are generally determines how this ends." Then he walked to the green sedan and drove away without further ceremony. Daniel stood in the doorway holding the envelope. He went inside. Made coffee. Burned the toast. Drank the coffee cold. Then he opened the envelope and read every page. It was comprehensive. The dossier included printed screenshots of his online post. Annotated in red marker. Notes from what appeared to be sessions with her therapist. Provided voluntarily. Describing, based entirely on Celeste's account. A pattern of controlling behavior and emotional surveillance. And a letter from her attorney. Describing Celeste as a woman in psychological recovery. Having endured years of emotional coercion. At the hands of her spouse. He read the last part twice. Coercion. He thought about the cinnamon rolls he'd brought to the train station. About the years he had stayed up editing the cover letters for her graduate school applications. About the birthday dinners he had organized. Because planning was not, as she routinely noted, her strength. About the 412 days. During which he had been the person who noticed when things needed to be done and quietly did them. Coercion. He laughed. Not like Celeste had laughed at the beach. Not with contempt or dismissal. He laughed the way a person laughs. When the absurdity of something breaks through the pain of it. And there is nothing else left to do. Then he picked up his burner phone. And spent the next 2 hours. Composing a single email to her attorney. One sentence in the body. I hope she has an explanation for the attached. The attachments were 7 files. Voice recordings. Screenshots. Time-stamped photographs, original files, metadata intact, GPS coordinates embedded in the header data. And one audio file that was 43 minutes long. Containing a conversation in which Celeste described. In language she would not want a family court judge to hear. Exactly what she thought of her husband. And exactly how little she believed he would ever actually do anything about it. He sent the email. Then he sat quietly in the ladderback chair. And waited. She called 48 minutes later. Blocked number. He answered anyway. Because he had known she would call. Had known since the moment he pressed send. And he was tired of waiting for things he already knew were coming. Her voice had shed everything he was accustomed to. The confidence was gone. The sharpness was gone. The performance was gone. What remained was something smaller and more honest. Than anything she had shown him in years. I think we need to talk. In person. Please. Yes. He said. We do. He chose the location. A diner in a small town midway between where he was staying and where she lived. A place so ordinary and unhurried. That no one would be watching anything except their own plates. He arrived first. Took a booth in the back corner. Ordered coffee. And waited. She came in 11 minutes late. Wearing an anniversary blouse he had bought her 2 years ago. A pale blue silk thing she'd admired in a shop window on a Sunday afternoon. And he'd gone back for on a Tuesday without telling her. Left it on the bed with a card that she'd kept in her bedside drawer for a year. He recognized the choice for what it was. Deliberate. A form of semaphore. Meant to evoke the man he used to be for her. The one who remembered what she admired in shop windows. The one who went back for things without being asked. She sat down across from him. Her face was different. Not devastated in the cinematic way of scenes like this. Not openly weeping, not visibly collapsed. She looked, more than anything, tired. And something else he had to look at carefully to name. Frightened. Not of him. Of the situation he had revealed by leaving. The one that had existed underneath the comfortable surface of her life. Without her ever truly having to account for it. He did not say hello. He slid the flash drive across the table. Watch every file before you say anything. She picked it up. Turned it over in her fingers. Didn't look at him. More of the same. Your voice, he said. Is in 4 of those recordings. Tell me which ones I manufactured. She set the flash drive in her purse without looking at it again. They sat in silence. The diner moved around them. Coffee cups refilled. Someone at the counter laughed at something the short order cook said. A child at the table nearest the window pressed their face against the glass to see the parking lot. The ordinary world. Indifferent. And continuous. I know I hurt you, she said finally, to the table. He waited. I made mistakes. Serious mistakes. I'm not trying to excuse them. But what you did, the post, getting Marcus fired, that's not you, Daniel. You're not a vindictive person. No, he said. I'm not. I posted the truth and let it do what truth does. You destroyed people's lives. I interrupted a deception, he said. The lives that needed dismantling were already built on someone else's destruction. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a document, folded twice, and set it on the table between them. She looked at it without touching it. What is this? The dissolution agreement. I've had it for 3 weeks. I needed your signature. She stared at it. He watched something move through her expression. A sequence of things, none of them quite readable. Each one arriving and departing too quickly to name. She reached out and unfolded it slowly. Read it. Read it again. You already moved everything. I did. When? Before the beach party. She looked up at him. And for a moment, just a moment, something in her face broke through its composure entirely. And he saw what was underneath it. Not guilt exactly. Not remorse as such. But something rawer and more private. The recognition, perhaps, of a man she had not actually seen in a very long time. A man who had been preparing for a future she had never believed he was capable of building. Without her. I don't know who I am, she said quietly. Without any of this. No, he said. Neither do I. But I'm going to find out. She signed the document. She capped the pen. Slid everything back across the table. Stood. She did not extend her hand. She did not say goodbye. She picked up her bag. And walked through the diner. And through the glass front door. And across the parking lot. To a car that didn't belong to her. Daniel sat in the booth for a long time after she was gone. He drank his coffee until it was cold. He watched a sparrow sit on the arm of the diner's sign. For several minutes before deciding to leave. Then he left a good tip for the waitress, who had quietly kept his cup filled, without asking him anything. And he went home. The weeks that followed were quieter than anything he had experienced in his adult life. Not empty. Just quiet in the way of cleared space. The specific quietness of a room after furniture has been rearranged. And everything is where it should be. And there is room now to move. Without catching yourself on something. He let the legal threat dissolve without acknowledgement. Her attorney sent a letter withdrawing the claims. 5 days after his email. No explanation. No further communication. The door simply closed. He was not healed. He was not whole in the way that healing resolves everything cleanly. He was something more honest than healed. He was in the middle of recovering. Aware of every step it was taking. Aware of the cost. But no longer pretending the bill wasn't his to pay. He woke early in the mornings. And sat in the ladder-back chair. And drank coffee. And watched the parking structure come into the light. And thought about nothing in particular. Healing is mostly the practice of tolerating your own company. Until you remember, incrementally, that you were good company all along. A message arrived from Meredith on the 6th week. Just a few lines. She wanted him to know she was okay. That it had been devastating and clarifying. In the way that devastating things sometimes are. That she had cancelled the wedding. And moved back to her hometown in coastal Georgia. And taken a job she liked better than the one she'd had. She ended with, "What you did, walking away and meaning it, was braver than anything I've ever watched a person do. I hope you know that." He read it 3 times. Not because he needed the validation. He had stopped needing that particular thing from external sources some weeks ago. Quietly, without ceremony. He read it because it was honest. And honesty, he was learning, lands differently. When you have spent a long time surrounded by its opposite. He wrote back. They began talking. Slowly at first. The careful, tentative way of two people who have been burned recently enough to be respectful of fire. They talked about small things. Music, places they had traveled. The particular quality of light in certain cities at certain times of year. They talked about the experience of starting over. After something large and formative has ended. Not as victims cataloging damage. But as people genuinely curious about what came next. She was not a rebound. He was not hers either. They were something harder to name than that. And both of them had enough recent experience. With the cost of misnamed things. To take the naming slowly. 3 months after the diner. Daniel Whitmore left Vernon's sublet. And moved to a mid-sized city in western North Carolina. He had visited once, years before, for a weekend. And had never entirely forgotten. He found a one-bedroom apartment with tall windows. That let in the afternoon light at an angle. That made everything look like a Dutch painting. He took on freelance graphic design work. Something he had done in his late 20s. And set aside when the stability of a corporate job had seemed more responsible. Turned out that the stability he had purchased with his 20s and 30s had not been very stable after all. He was good at the design work. He had forgotten how good. He adopted a dog from a county shelter. The dog was 9 years old. A gray-muzzled mixed breed of uncertain heritage. Who walked with a slight list to the left. And had an opinion about everything. The shelter had named her Governor. Which Daniel kept because it suited her. Governor slept at the foot of his bed. And followed him from room to room. With the devoted attention of someone who had waited a long time to have a person to follow. And was not going to waste it now. He was not, it should be said, entirely at peace. There were mornings when he lay in the Dutch painting light of his new bedroom and felt the particular ache of years given to something that had turned out not to be what he believed it was. There were evenings when he drove back from somewhere and pulled into the parking lot of his building. And sat in the car longer than necessary. Looking at nothing. There were moments when a song came on that he associated with a better version of his marriage. And he felt the loss of it. Not of Celeste as she had actually been. But of the person he had believed she was in the beginning. And of the life he had organized around believing it. These moments came less frequently. They were, he told Meredith on a Thursday evening. When they had graduated from text to a long phone call. That lasted past midnight. Getting shorter. Not gone. Just shorter. That's probably how it works, she said. I don't think they're ever supposed to completely disappear. They're just supposed to stop being the loudest thing. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I think that's right. Governor climbed up onto the couch next to him while they talked. Turned twice in the specific way that she always turned twice. And settled her gray head on his knee. With the authority of an animal. Who has decided. This is simply where she belongs now. He rested his hand on her back. He kept talking. Here is what it is important to understand. About Daniel Whitmore. He was not extraordinary. He was not an exceptional man. In the ways that people usually mean. When they use that word. He was not brilliant or wealthy or particularly daring. He had not been the most impressive person in any room he'd entered for the last decade. He was the quiet kind of man who remembered things. Birthdays, preferences, the names of people's children. And fixed things when they needed fixing. And showed up when showing up was required. And did not, ever, make more of himself than was warranted. He was the kind of man that a certain kind of person mistakes for someone who will stay regardless. The mistake was understandable. He had stayed for a long time. He had stayed through small cruelties and large ones. He had stayed through being laughed at, diminished, dismissed. He had stayed through nights when the weight of what he was tolerating pressed down on him like something physical. And in the mornings he had gotten up and made coffee and gone to work and come home and done it again. Because he had believed, deeply and for a long time, that love was something you demonstrated through persistence, through patience, through the willingness to outlast the difficult seasons. What he learned, standing on a cold beach with a warm beer he wasn't drinking, watching his wife laugh at the idea that he might mean what he said. What he learned was that persistence, mistaken for love, applied to a situation that doesn't deserve it, is not patience. It's erosion. The man who walked through the scrub pines behind that beach and stood on the shoulder of a coastal highway with 11% battery on his phone was not the same man who sat in the one-bedroom apartment with the Dutch painting light and governor's gray head on his knee. The first man had spent years believing that the way to be loved was to become indispensable, to be so useful, so consistent, so reliably present, that leaving became unthinkable. He had offered himself as infrastructure and was confused when infrastructure didn't inspire devotion. The second man understood something simpler and harder than that. You cannot make anyone see your worth by making yourself impossible to lose. You can only walk away when the conditions of staying are no longer ones you recognize as your own life. And you have to mean it. Celeste Whitmore spent several months in what Daniel heard about only in second-hand reports from Brienne, who kept a cautious correspondence with him. In the year that followed, she had moved to a smaller apartment. She had left the marketing firm and taken a position elsewhere, in a city an hour away. She had, by Brienne's carefully worded account, grown quieter. Daniel received this information and held it lightly, without satisfaction and without cruelty. He did not wish her harm. He had loved her once with the entire force of what he then understood love to be. That love had changed its shape entirely, had compressed and cooled into something that no longer pained him to touch, more like old scar tissue than active wound. He did not know what she had lost. He knew only what he had found. A chair by a window. A dog with opinions. Work that connected to something real in him. A woman in coastal Georgia who understood, from the inside, the particular calculus of choosing honesty over comfort. And mornings. Quiet, unhurried mornings, in which he belonged to no one's narrative but his own. There is a version of this story that ends with dramatic vindication, with a public reckoning, with the protagonist made whole by the complete collapse of the person who wronged him. That version exists, and people love it. Because it offers the clean satisfaction of restored balance. This is not that story. This story ends with a man and a dog and a cup of coffee. And the specific, unremarkable dignity of a life that is, finally, entirely his own. He had said. On a beach in North Carolina. On a cold night with the fire still going. And the music still playing. 6 words. That no one had taken seriously. You won't find me here when you come back. He had been the last person to believe them. And then, quietly, with great precision, and no further announcement, he had made them true.